Observability Driven Development.
Hello. So we had a really great conversation around what types of things could be observed and how to build an observable system and how that's different from a system that has like 100% test coverage and how it's possibly equally impossible to build a system that's 100% covered through a test as it is to make a 100% observable system, because then you have to have a copy of the system to observe it. We also talked a little bit about different kinds of people in the organization and what kinds of things they might want to observe. So everything from like IT systems and how those work, as well as things that happen across organizations or across systems and APIs, and even things that happen in meat space where people are involved in doing a part of a process that needs to be observed. So the main, one of the main takeaways was that it's really hard to go from 0 observability to 1 observability, but it's a little bit easier to go from 1 to 2 to 3. We didn't define what those numbers were, but getting something observed is much harder than getting the second or third thing observed. And it's also pretty critical at the minimum to be able to observe the things that happen in between the systems that you need to work in. So for example, data that goes from one API into another API, or a file that's sent from a client to another, a server or something. We also talked about using observability-driven development to make a team be less reactive. And this also kind of we also had an interesting conversation around that, where being reactive is sometimes useful because you can't always be proactive and you can't predict everything that's going to happen. So as long as you don't wind up getting into a situation where you're always putting out fires, it's not a bad thing to react to things that happen as long as you can fix it in the second rev. We also talked a lot about the context of observing, things like in one system something might be called a user, and in another system it would be called a customer, or even across different parts of an application, things might have different meanings, and how do you address that? And part of that is also related to how you plan for the things that you're going to observe. So we did talk about different kinds of things that are important to different stakeholders, like a business user might be more interested in customer value, but somebody else might be more interested in uptime and things like that. We also had an interesting sidebar about observability versus personally identifiable information. So in a lot of systems that deal with personal data, such as health records or financial systems, you don't really want to let somebody see individual people's social security numbers or email addresses or things like that. So there's some questions around how to do that. But we came to the conclusion that the first step is to really plan on how you go from 0 to 1, and then how do you, and then take that and make sure that you measure where there are boundaries, where you have discontinuities in your processes. Thank you.